Well, we were going to talk about how we make the work. Was that true?
That was the starting point.
And I would like to hear from you because you have a very interesting and complex process that I think people would be very interested in.
Yeah. So, yeah, we had a conversation a little earlier this week, knowing that Donna has done talks in this space before. I wanted to hear what she suggested was the structure we should have. And so I hope we end up asking each other lots of questions so that we go a little deeper. But I'm going to start with just how I made the work, and hopefully we'll talk about why together. But essentially what I did was I took screenshots from found video and used them as a starting point for abstraction. So I took the movement of the video and interpreted it in clay. But when I say that, I don't mean that I did it necessarily from observation. It's more that it was a starting point. The video happened to be of people wrestling. The press release says 2 people wrestling, but it's actually, and who knows how many. I then made that movement in plasticine clay, which has become a recurring medium for me for many years. I find that abstraction comes most easily to me in clay. And I love plasticine because you can cast it into sheets and then bend those sheets. And it's also endlessly reusable, so it's become like, it is my paint in a way. And I then made 3D digital assets of all of the environment from those videos and placed the clay object as a 3D scan into those environments and had it kind of interact with those elements through a kind of procedural means, which, you know, in some ways I think is related to what I think part of this conversation will be about, which is not fully knowing the outcome of something and working through all of the chance happenings of an action, which is one of the reasons why I've gotten interested in simulated motion, rather than, you know, like, I'm often thinking with like folds, for example. You know, it's very similar to if you're making a drawing and there are folds, or, you know, I'm a teacher, and this is the analogy that comes to my mind. If you're making a drawing of an open book and there's text in the book, and you make that choice of whether the text becomes legible or it becomes marks. The simulation was sort of like my mark making, the kind of trial and error mark making. And then the work is cut by a CNC machine in many pieces, which is basically a router that moves around based on the coordinates that you give it, and then kind of put together like a big puzzle and rearranged to resolve the work and clean it up. So lots of sanding, lots of chiseling. Doesn't pump it out for you. So that's what I did.
Wow. Yeah, it's really remarkable to me that our work has, this is really interesting to me, how come I just throw some cheesecloth on the canvas and then pour buckets of paint? Or an assistant does that. And, but our work, the work, has such a great dialogue. I've never been, I don't think I've done too many two-person shows in my life. And I don't think ever with a sculptor, a real sculptor. And I just think that our work is speaking to its you know, the paintings are like speaking to the sculpture speaking to the paintings, and that to me is really interesting because I don't know what I do. And that's something that Andrew said. Could you tell, because you mentioned a philosopher that talked about the no.
Yeah. So this is my leading point to how I think we relate. Well, I don't know, it's going to be hard to organize it, but the philosopher that I mentioned was Ludwig Wittgenstein, and I used to be very, very interested in Wittgenstein, and I think it's very poetic how he went from, at the beginning, believing in a logical space that is above the world and has its own parameters that cannot be changed, to then deciding that actually everything has a use value and language is what it is in the moment. For example, a brick is an object, but if I yell brick and I'm at a construction site, it means bring me a brick. He says in his second book that talks about this change in his perspective, it's called The Philosophical Investigations, that to say I know is actually to say move on from that statement. I'm not going to demonstrate what I know, just move on. And so I find that to be poignant, and it proves for me things that I believe in, which is I work from a place of not knowing as well. And it's not necessarily not knowing about materials, it's more not knowing what things mean and what histories they are involved in. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting because I had a conversation earlier with Jan, and you brought up, you know, how certain work, you know, moves you or initiates ideas and so on. And then I said, from my perspective, work doesn't do that. It's all in the viewer. And therefore, as a painter, my job is to make a painting that's really interesting to look at. That's my only job. And, you know, then I believe if a painting is really active and interesting, all kinds of stuff, because the viewer does not simply walk on by because it wasn't interesting, but judging from my own experience of looking at art, not only paintings, but everything, then I am activated. And all of it's so fabulous art. You know, I'm so old. And I always thought art was really interesting, obviously, but now I'm like super interested in it. You know, I'm so interested and fascinated, and I have a big collection of all kinds of people's work up in my house, and I'm always moving the work around, and I just love looking at art, and I am so activated. But I am not, it's interesting. The kind of activation is not, to me, to me the most interesting activation is to the way an art object can redirect the way you think about your own environment. So, I mean, your sculptures, Andrew, and even since I was a bit privy, since I saw the printouts up on your wall, that made me really think, the wrestlers, they're involved in this game, this competition, this fun, and then you are refocusing me, the viewer, on something they are not really focusing on.
Yeah.
All of this, the whole world, all of nature, it's incredibly interesting and fabulous. And that's the reason, it's hard for me to hear like political statements and so on. I was kidding Thomas a little bit about this thing because, oh my God, we all know about this and read about it all the time, the papers and so on. And I just want, all I want to do is experience art. That's all I want to do. That's all I want to do, And because it's like suddenly, it's like Alice in Wonderland, especially as you get really close to the end of your life. It's like this door opens and you're like, oh my God. It's just so interesting just to think. And what I am interested in non-verbal physical art objects, paintings and sculpture, is that to me, I am the least directed as a human being. So when I look at a sequential film or read a novel or something, this world does open up in my mind. I prefer to read rather than see the movie, but it's much more directed. And it's this non-directed. I always thought painting is so incredible now. How come the museums are so packed? I always think with painting, it's because you don't have to stand there, walk on by, or come back to it. The viewer they have the power to receive the art, every single person, And that's what's so beautiful, and I think it does, I think painting and sculpture and that kind of thing, it doesn't get weaker in this time, It just seems to get almost stronger because people have a lot of volition,
Yeah. So part of what I'm getting from what you're saying is, it's not necessarily the work of the artist to translate ideas because the ideas are within the viewer, and I agree with that. I have a certain philosophy that I work with, which is that ideas are for you personally, and I'm not just saying that because that's a paraphrasing of that statement. Ideas do not translate immediately to objects and images. Ideas are for you. They are your opinions, they are your feelings, and abstraction is the creation of a thing that expresses that thing that can't be said in words, or that thing that doesn't exist if you don't make it. And that's why I've replaced the word idea in my vocabulary in the studio with vision. I don't try to have ideas, or I have lots of ideas, but they're for me. What I can do is I can have a vision that contains some of what my ideas have and give it to the viewer. And the difference between an idea and a vision is a vision has details, and that's part why I see there's crossover. And you can think of it politically, and you can also think of it emotionally. For example, this is a theory that I've been developing for a few years based off of conversations, based off of reading, but what comes to mind is a book by Stephen Duncombe called Reimagining Politics in the Age of Fantasy. And in it, he talks about a lot of different approaches to protest and how one can work the language of a spectacle into protest. Now, a spectacle actually really relates to abstraction in painting and sculpture because the theorist Walter Lippmann defined spectacle as, or the pundit Walter Lippmann, spectacle as the animation of an abstraction. And in Stephen Duncone's book, he tries to tease that out. What does that mean? And one of his examples, it was written right after the Bush years, is a protest group called Billionaires for Bush that would go to Bush rallies dressed as billionaires to kind of farcically infiltrate the scene, and they were successful. So people didn't necessarily see them as a farce. But what does that mean? That means that their vision involved what does a billionaire look like? You know, looks like the Monopoly Man maybe, right? That although you can use that in an illustrative sense, you can also use it for your own personal ideas, is my belief. You know, but you know, at the same time, because a vision doesn't fully necessarily translate, like in that example, they could have failed. It didn't necessarily have to work as a great piece of parafiction, right? But they still did it, right?
But they weren't really billionaires. They were just dressed.
They were just dressed as what a
Yeah,
billionaire was.
I love that idea. I think I'm going to try that.
But you know, let me bring it to the paintings, right? There are details in what makes your paintings work, right? And you have to resolve them, whether or not it feels that whether or not it feels that it's disingenuous to alter what happened in your process. At some point you must, I assume, step back and rearrange some details or accept some details.
Well, no, I'm really this is what's so interesting, I'm really quite far in my process, far away from your process. And because I work, this painting is completely done from the back. There's no direct work on this side at all. And so when the cheesecloth, I mean, it's all done differently because I have assistants. But this particular painting, I, for some reason, told the assistant, now put lines like this, lines like this, lines like this with these cheesecloth that's saturated with gel medium. So it's like drawing. And I told them what to do. And then they went away for the holidays, my assistants. And I had this big painting, flat on milk crates. And then I had it face down. And so in order, I have to pour these gallons of liquid onto the back of the canvas. And then sometimes I lay down on the floor, is anything coming through? And it drip, 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 drip. And I put like 3 gallons on it. It's like I just got a little mark. And so, it's Christmas. This particular painting actually is a kind of a breakthrough painting. And it was around Christmas and New Year's and no one was around. So then, in order to flip it, it's very heavy, so I lay out, the milk crates really close to the first 4 milk crates that the painting is on, and then I go, bam! And then I look at it because I wasn't able to see it just laying on the floor like that. So milk crates are only that tall. So, and I keep doing that and trying, and my whole intention is to get, not the image, not making a good painting, nothing. It's to get the paint through the canvas. That's all I want to do. And the thing is, there is an agency, I strongly believe, in paint, in canvas. I don't like to say that because a lot of people think it's a kind of like woo, but there definitely is. And certain pigments, as you all know, are lighter in weight and they go through the canvas more readily. So reds and oranges are lightweight pigments and they go through the canvas more readily. But it also depends on if it's a number 8, a number 10, or a number 12. It also depends where does the canvas come from, because canvas comes from all over the world. It's pretty fascinating. Everything's gotten it very expensive and canvas is cheap as dirt. Costs nothing. The freight cost a lot, you know, but I have huge rolls because I can't resist. I'm like, oh my goodness, this roll is $250. So I have huge rolls of I'm never going to live long enough to use all that canvas, you know? So this is a number 10. And to get all of that color through the number 10, that's my only aim. That's my only aim. But then people say, well, yeah, Donna, you say that, but how come your paintings look like your paintings? And that is a question.
Well, I think what I was saying earlier, that you must, essentially at some point look at the front and then reassess, accept it or change it is a little bit challenging, that because even in your description of doing this painting, you said you turned it over and then you did it, you kept going.
Yeah, but I didn't change the drawing because the lines harden. Mm-hmm. The lines harden. So the drawing is fixed. So the thing is, around the drawing is where you get kind of a different kind of absorption, you know? And so I never changed the drawing, from the initial drawing, which is often done by assistants. Mm-hmm. And so the main thing, the main decisions about, well, it's not a painting yet, is that it just, it just wasn't colorful enough to suit me. It didn't amount to anything, It wasn't an image, but just pouring from the other side, keep pouring all the paint, eventually an image appears. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but every painting is different. I mean, that painting is completely different, made completely different. That's all from the front. So it's, but that one is the one that interests me, just for that very reason. And, it's not easy for me to do a good painting. That's the truth.
Yeah.
Some of them are a lot better. Now, what about you, Andrew? Do you feel that some of your sculptures are a lot better than others?
Yeah, definitely.
Why?
The best ones that I make, I kind of enter a flow state and it just works itself out. And it's not the first one in a series. For example, in these two, that one, they were made at the same time, but that one, the clay model was made second, and I'm much happier with it. I also have this thing, if you were to look at the works I've made over the past few years, because some are figurative and some are not. I tend to make one figurative thing, and then it's like all of these doors open for a less figurative work. It's like the act of representation opens up ways for me to be free in the medium that I'm using at that time.
What don't you like? But do you have an I've seen some little characters. They're almost like little characters out of English stories or something. Mm-hmm. How do you reject those, like, because I think those are, they go in a, this is much more abstract and kind of cerebral, and the thing is, your work is always cerebral, and then when you put those little funny little characters in there in cerebral work, there's an odd disjunction that's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, part of how I got to this place of being interested in not knowing and having visions instead of ideas was an interest in researching my own background that is somewhat disjunctive, and you know, I am inspired by types of reuse that happen in communities that have a kind of a lack of oral history or written history, and so you know, you end up with these forms that are part detritus of the contemporary moment and part invented by those people, and that is one of the things that I try to deal with, whether I decide to or not. One time, I have a friend that is a writer, and he wrote an obituary for the poet Derek Walcott, and in it, he mentioned me. I've never met Derek Walcott. I didn't know anything about him at that point. And he was talking about artists of Caribbean descent and like the legacy that Derek Walcott left. And so then after being mentioned in his obituary, I read some stuff, and you know, he was talking about how people of colonized nations have a profound ability to make things up. And so sometimes I see the characters in previous work as kind of like monsters, as like the made up part.
Yeah, yeah.
And then lately, my intention with using video to make sculpture is actually, it came to me in an idea way rather than a vision way, which was, you know, I started to think metaphorically about how found video has blurred edges and it's uncontrolled. And I was like thinking, what if I fill those blurred parts with my own thing?
Oh.
And anyway, you know, like I had a show at a gallery I work with in Milan called Klima in 2019, 2020. It was called Hallmark, which was a play on words. In that Hallmark, you know, it's like the greeting card company, and then it's also the word for a stamp, and it had these motifs of things that you would see at a Hallmark store, like little characters that look like cartoon dogs and balloons and festive things. And yeah, you know, I was sort of thinking of it as like a reuse, like the kind of reuse that you would see in a voodoo altar. That actually, Cheryl Donegan's here. Hi, Cheryl. Remember when we did the talk at for your show at New Museum, and you were talking about screens? I don't remember what the question was, but I brought up this same thing. I was talking about these. I mean, I don't even remember. It was the movie The Serpent and the Rainbow, which is about a voodoo witch doctor that makes a potion or a powder that can make zombies, and it's just contained and reuses jars. I find that to be the poignant, or the thing that as somebody who doesn't know anything, the poignant part. I can see the powerful things in the reuse jar, and that I can translate to other people. So I can see that, you know, to mention art people, like, you know, like people that, artists that, maybe I get compared to, like a lot of people have been coming in here and saying that something about Rachel Harrison down the street, right? I can see the relationship between Rachel Harrison putting a quotidian object on a abstract thing, relating to me, yeah, I get it. That's part of what I do. I'm also interested in someone like Huma Baba, where it works from one side, it doesn't work on the other side, and then you just see the way it's constructed. And then it's a real push and pull. How much of the construction gets seen, and to the point, where there's a point where it looks like it's just not good,
Yeah.
But it's funny. You mentioned the number of canvas on that you use, and that was one of the things I was thinking I wanted to ask you about. Was I would guess that you obviously would have a canvas that is going to work.
No, I don't, because I did get some rolls now. So that's a lot of canvas, so I probably will in the future. But up till now, I've been getting my canvas in these boxes, from Jerry's Artorama, and on their sale days. And so and they put the crummiest canvas in the boxes. And I like it if it's crummy, because if it's crummy, it really takes the paint. The good canvas, now I have a roll, now I'm nervous, because one of my rolls is very white. And I'm like, oh, I hope it's not like bleached, or, I don't know how it's going to take the paint, and I don't know if I'm going to like the white. And that's the thing with this painting. It's very hard to get white paint to go through the canvas, very hard. Like that painting is all done from one side, which is, I don't have any paintings, that's kind of unique. I don't usually do that. I usually do work from both sides, or just from the back. But the white paint came through the canvas, and white is must be a big molecule. But first, I poured the light blue, and the light blue carried the white like a friend through the canvas. So the white so there can now be the canvas color itself can now function as a color, and I really like that. But it's so hard to do. I'm not kidding. It's so hard to do to get the white to go through. And I've just, like I say, I cannot guarantee the quality of my future work. I really can't. I have a dealer down in Philadelphia, and she said, we want smaller painting. I'm like, oh. It's just like they have no idea how hard this is for me, and I can't see, and I'm 79, and I'm like, ooh. Yeah, so, but I think that's why my paintings are getting better, because I can't see. I do. I know, I'm really not kidding, because I literally cannot see very well at all. And so more and more, I do hear really well. And like some people I know my age don't hear very well. But I do. I hear very well. And the whole thing about music, I think, is really interesting, because when I was young, I never listened to music that much, and then I would go through a phase where I'd listen to like a lot of jazz, for instance, and then I'd say, oh, no more music, I'm not going to listen to music, and then I'd go a few years and not listen to music. Now, I listen all the time to music, and I feel that there is a real relationship. I even brought my boom box. I wanted to tell you, how many people ever heard of Henry Cowell? I had never heard of him. He was John Cage's teacher. And this is just one example. I have a few different CDs where it's not really music, it's the sound. It's the sound that's really affecting me. It affects me in my body. And that's different than music. Like his pieces are very short. And they're from the first decade of the 20th century. And he was only a teenager when he made this music. But he did a huge body of work. You know, he lived to be old, and he was John Cage's teacher and a lot of other people's teacher. But like he and, you know, a few other, you know, CDs I have, it's not the music, it's the sound. Like Alexander Prokofiev's Alexander Nevsky. I listened to it over and over again. And I feel there is a parallel between the sound and the space. The space is affecting me in the painting. I wouldn't use any literary term, but it's affecting me like the sound. And that's really interesting, and it's just kind of a new thing. And I think maybe it is affecting me in some way, you know, listening to this sound all the time. And I almost feel like I thought I would play. These are only like 3 minutes. Would you mind? Can you plug in that boom box? This isn't my favorite recording, actually. It's like a little too professional or something, but it's all right. Maybe you can't hear it. No, I don't think you can hear it.
Something's happening.
Can you hear it?
Yeah. It's just low. There we go.
I don't think you can hear it. Because it gets really, barely, you know, audible. But anyway, just get it yourself. It's Henry Cole, and the CD I really like is called New Music. And it's like got kind of an Art Deco, you know, cover. And it was a little performance in San Francisco in the 60s. And of several different pianists. And it's very, very early music of his. And he also did the later work, all kinds of interesting work where the different musicians could come in, you know, there was 4 or 5 different places where they could come into the piece. You know, they're called mosaics. And, you know, but it kind of doesn't matter, you know, if it's from what period it is, the music. It's just like a few CDs like really affect me in a very profound way. And I think, oh, well, what is that effect I'm feeling? And it's the effect of the abstraction of abstract painting. And it's a physical, visceral thing. And it's super interesting to me. Like super, super interesting. And it really, I think it's affecting my painting quite a bit. Just this realization. You know, so it's just recent, this thing. So the thing is I'm worried about with these smaller paintings this other dealer wants, because if the painting is too much of an object, I can't get the space going. They have to be big. These aren't that big compared to a lot of people's paintings, but I have to be able to get the space going. That's the whole thing. The whole thing is the space, you know? So I just may have to say, I'm sorry, I just can't do that.
Yeah.
Should we see if they have some questions?
Sure.
I'm just curious, do you get any visceral feelings from color like that? No?
No, I mean, people say, what's your favorite colors? You know, I got my buckets. To me, the color is not more important or more interesting than the water. The water. Because everything is buckets, these buckets. And then I put the wetting agent in the water, and I'm very sloppy with it. You know, I don't measure it out. So all different colors have different absorptions, and that's on purpose, you know, so that sometimes one color can carry another color.
One of the things that I love about painting and sculpture is that it's not prescribed as a form. So when you do something with a material, unlike a craft, you are not doing a process, but you're doing a variation on a process. And so for me, I am thinking a lot about the kind of chemistry that you do in your paintings and how it relates to the kind of chemistry that I do in my work that becomes a recurring motif, because you're not doing that technique, but you're reliving that experience that you've made with a technique. Like, for example, the cheesecloth technique that you have, right? It's not something, someone else could steal it, but they wouldn't do it. It's your own thing, right? Mm-hmm. Anyway, the reason why I'm saying this in relation to this question about color is that, I think about color all the time. When you mentioned the white thing, automatically I'm thinking, oh, it's because white is a heavier pigment. That's why when you go to Home Depot and you get a bucket of paint, it always starts with white, because that makes things more opaque, right? I mean, and it's not like I have to know that, but I do know it, and it carries through everything. And and there are certain things that you do know that every time you do it, it's going to be new, but you're still going to try. It's a starting point, or it's a variation.
Right, but everything, all the colors. I never learned to color theory. I just didn't learn that. So I've only had very little education, and that was not in my education, was color theory. And I just thought all the colors, one color is good as another. And so I basically, when I was teaching, when I first started teaching, they said, everybody here, even the senior faculty, has to teach foundation. I said, okay, fine. So they gave me a couple foundation classes, and the next year they're like, no, you're not gonna teach foundation.
Well, I went to Cooper Union, and they're very obsessed with Joseph Albers, and I do have a favorite color. It's yellow. And it's yellow because when you put yellow in shadow, it's green or orange, and it can never just be yellow anymore next to another yellow.
Very interesting. I'll keep that in mind. When people say tidbits like that, I do try to remember them. Well, maybe that should be the end of it. Do you think so?
Yeah. Okay.